Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. This is going to be a panel in a mixture of English and Polish, so if you don't speak both languages, make sure you have a headset. It's a really huge topic that we're here to discuss with many different parts to it. We're going to be talking about changing alliances in Europe, about the Transatlantic alliance, about how all of that has changed in the last couple of years. And we've got three very interesting panelists with very different perspectives to talk about that. For me, I'm quite new in Poland, and it's, you know, before this I spent a lot of time in Hungary, and in Hungary you sort of knew exactly where you were. You knew the government hated Brussels, it hated Biden, it loved Trump, it was very easy. And in Poland, I think in the context of the war in Ukraine, things feel a bit more confusing. We talk about Poland as this new center of Europe. At the same time, we see, you know, campaign adverts with the ruling party chairman telling Germany to stop interfering in Poland. We're in a country where there were reasonably warm relations with Trump, unlike most European countries, yet we also have President Biden coming to Warsaw and talking about Poland as one of America's great allies. So I guess I want to start off by asking the panelists, and maybe I'll start with you, Anne. How has the war in Ukraine changed Poland's standing in Europe, and are all of these suggestions that the center of gravity in Europe has moved further east, how justified are they?
So first of all, thank you. I'll speak in English unless the crowd screams for Polish, but I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for the invitation. You're right that Poland is in a strange position right now. Right before the war, the Biden administration was actually talking about sanctions on Poland, was asking what it was going to do to make sure that Poland didn't become Hungary, that it didn't slide in the direction of autocracy and dictatorship. And then since the war has broken out, Poland does have, it's true, and as the ruling party noticed, has a special status because US weapons have to come through Poland to get to Ukraine. Poland becomes an important, simply geographically, a very, very important part of the NATO alliance. And also Poland is potentially on the front line of the war. And so the Biden administration needs to have very good relations with Poland at all times. I mean, if something were to happen, tomorrow or this evening, there would have to be an immediate telephone relationship between Biden and President Duda. So we all understand that. And so that's created a special role for Poland. The Polish government, I should say, not all Poles, Poland's difficulties with the EU, the friction with Germany, the friction with France, which is less noticed but just as important, has made Poland, has undermined, I would say, the idea that Poland will become some kind of Central European leader. So I think even the Biden administration knows that Poland can't play a big role in Europe. It's in conflict with too many of its partners. And the role that some imagine Poland would play, as you know, the new center of gravity, really can't happen unless there's either a change of government or a change of behavior, of the current ruling party. So it's a strange moment. People are anxious about this election. They're watching carefully what happens. Many do fear that if a third term for an autocratic populist party would mean that Poland will not be able to remain in the European Union because the European Union, if it's nothing else, it's a kind of empire of laws. It's based on rule of law. Each state has to expect that laws will be respected by other states, and if you have a politicized judiciary, that's not possible. So, the theme of this conference, which is that we're at a turning point, I think is real. Poland has the possibility of becoming a leader in the Transatlantic alliance and in Europe because of its role with Ukraine. But it could hold itself back if it remains run by an anti-European party.
Thank you. And Elżbieta, maybe I'll come to you for the perspective of from Brussels as an MEP with the current opposition party at a time when a lot of people in Europe have been sort of championing Poland for its support to Ukraine. How is the view from Brussels in that? How do you separate those two parts of the question of the things you're very unhappy about domestically and Poland's new role as the sort of hero of the fight against Ukraine? Against Russia.
Dziękuję bardzo, Sean, za te pytania, ale zanim odpowiem, chciałabym Państwa bardzo gorąco
for this question, but before I give you the answer, I would like to welcome you very warmly. I would like to welcome all the online audience. I'm very happy that I can be here in the place where we are discussing the situation in Poland. I think that Poland is at the turning point, just like in the Freedom Games. Many Poles hope that on the 15th 15th of October, we will wake up in the country where the basic rules, the rule of law, the human rights, democracy will be the fundamentals. Although for the past 8 years the current government was violating. However, the strength of my nation, the nation that has experienced socialism, and we will not allow this government to damage democracy. So we have to see what the result of the election will be. Poland should play a very important part in this part of Europe. We are neighbors with Ukraine, and when we talk about Ukraine's accession to the EU, when we talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war, when we're talking about support to Ukraine at different fields, also support to democracy, self-government, Poland has a great opportunity in this respect, but it's up to Poles whether they will use this opportunity or not. It depends on the election. But I also think that many people appreciate the impact of the election. If the populist, the current government wins, it's the Law and Justice Party is a socialist party, so it will be a very clear signal inside Europe to those who are also waiting with the hope to change the direction, the view to the development of Europe. They also consider cooperation with Putin. In Germany, this kind of party is already strongly support. Le Pen maybe is likely to win the next parliamentary election in France. So this proximity and cooperation and support to Putin's Russian does discourage people. So that's why Le Pen didn't win the last election.
There's still much ahead of us, but contrary to the opinions of many, this election is important for the future of the European Union, and the European Union is in a difficult moment, one of the hardest moments for 35 years.
Okay, thanks very much. There's a lot there that I'm sure we'll come back to. Marta, I want to turn to you as a representative of Google. We're people talking about turning point. Looking at this from the perspective of a big in Poland, does it matter who will win the elections in the US, which we're going to come on to in a minute? How important is this from your perspective?
Dziękuję bardzo za to pytanie.
Thank you very much for this question, and before I give my answer, I would like to highlight that this is most probably the first international panel having 3 female panelists. So I hope it's going to become a standard and not an exception. I would like to refer to what we said about the special role of Poland. Poland is a home for Google's operations in Europe. The special status results from the geopolitical situation, and we also have got US military here, and we have also mentioned many layers of response to the war in Ukraine, not only in the political aspect, but also the response of economy and accepting the refugees. Moreover, Poland joined the response in the crisis, and civic society also responded to the crisis immediately. I would like to refer to the context of the turning point and whether it does exist. Well, I suppose that looking at current politics, we might think we have no good news. we've got the war beyond our border and the multi-level social life is a fact. We need to find the positive aspects that we should stick to and leverage on. When we think about an American company's approach to the turning point, I have to say that this is something we cannot escape. For business, which on the one hand runs its commercial operations, but on the other hand is affected by the war, for instance, intensified disinformation or cyber hazards. The last 18 months since the war broke out was like a call and saying we have no other choice but to tighten the bond between Europe and the USA. There are no other regions in the world that would share similar values, that would have similar trade exchange, and that despite various tensions due to IRA or common strategy towards China, I suppose we could call these problems lesser weight problems and less important the tremendous need to maintain the transatlantic bond, which has many dimensions and many layers and goes beyond who wins the election. We participate in these relationships and we are its beneficiaries or subjects, so we have to consider how to make it resilient to political changes. Looking at current vectors of forces around the world, there is no other choice but to fight for common values and get ready for hazards from Russia or China. I suppose this is like the umbrella of values that we should be driven by in the American business.
Okay, well, I mean, if you talk about the umbrella of values and we talk about the threats from Russia and China, but we obviously have another election coming up next year in the US. And I mean, so I just came back from Kiev and it was at the same event that Anne was at last week in Kiev. And you can see with the Ukrainians that although they don't really want to talk about it, there is this looming feeling of what is going to happen if Donald Trump comes back as president. Even if he doesn't come back as president, if he wins the Republican nomination, which seems quite likely, we're going to have months and months of a particular kind of messaging from him, potentially, about the future of the war in Ukraine, maybe about doing a deal, all of this kind of stuff. So I just wonder kind of how, and clearly that's factoring into thinking in the Kremlin about how they should deal with Europe and the world, and maybe it's worth just waiting a year until there's someone more amenable in Washington. So I wonder how important you feel that looming threat is, and if there's anything Europe can do to mitigate it, or if we should just be keeping our fingers crossed.
I'm going to say two contradictory things, okay? Sorry. Number one, Trump doesn't represent the entire Republican Party. The majority of Republicans in Congress continue to support the war in Ukraine, including the leadership of the Senate in particular, but also all of the important House of Representatives, committee members, leaders, you know, the Armed Services Committee, people who are responsible for budgets. And the support for Ukraine in the United States overall remains very positive. So it's not as if there's a popular demand to end support for the war. On the other hand, Trump comes from and is deeply connected to a far-right movement that is has representatives. You mentioned the AfD, Marine Le Pen in France. There are links to those parties and movements also here in Poland. This is a movement that has thrived by attacking democracy, by undermining NATO, by attacking the European Union. And Trump in his first term was prevented by people around him from moving hard in that direction. But in his second term, those kinds of people won't be there. And his instincts, which have always been actually for many years anti-European, but more, isolationist, against the idea of America playing a role in the world, supporting democracy, and really, frankly, against democracy itself, would be a huge threat to Allied solidarity in support of Ukraine. So what will happen if Trump becomes the candidate, and if indeed he should win, is you will begin to see a clash between the kind of Trumpist Republican Party and the rest. And there's even some preparation for that has begun. So in the Senate now, there is a group of senators working on a law that would prevent Trump from withdrawing from NATO. Because in his first term, he wanted to withdraw from NATO. He was prevented by his advisors from withdrawing from NATO. In the second term, he might try again. So you will see a clash. It will not be possible for him to act completely unilaterally by himself, and there will be even constitutional issues. I would nevertheless finish by saying it's very, very important for Europeans in the sphere of defense to begin thinking about a European alternative. What would a European army look like? What would European defense procurement look like? How can Europe act through the EU or through other European institutions more coherently in strategy and security and defense? The United States, as you know, we are very lucky that we had as a president right now someone who remembered the Cold War, who had sympathy for Europe, sympathy for Poland actually, and sympathy for Ukraine. Even if Trump is not the next president, we can't guarantee that sympathy will always be there. And for Europe to begin to think about acting as a whole is extremely important. And this is another reason why it's extremely important for Poland to remain at the center of European debate, to remain an influential member of the European Union.
I would like to add that Europe and European Union is fully aware of these hazards and thoroughly analyzes what could happen and how it would affect the security of Europe if Trump or Republicans win. That's why we hear strong opinions saying that Europe, for its defense, is very strongly related or dependent on the United States, and that's why it should seek for another alternative. The President of the European Commission during the last debate in Strasbourg on the State of Europe said that we witness the birth of the geopolitical European Union, which seeks other alliances, wants to be a strong leader considering security, because it's fully aware that the hazards around do exist. Many specialists and analysts claim that the alliance of the European Union with the United States heads towards energy and economy alliance. The issue of defense, even if Biden wins, we can expect some pressure on other directions of the US policy, for instance, the issue of Taiwan, China, and it should be oriented towards these directions, not necessarily towards Ukraine. This is a hazard. I keep my fingers crossed, and I do hope that the majority of the Polish society is for Democrats, and we hope they will win. If Biden is selected, that he would win the election. We should seek our own way by strengthening internal European defense and not only rely on the United States, because nowadays the participation of the US in military and financial support in Ukraine is huge, and we cannot imagine a situation in which it does not exist, but the current analyses are quite worrying. I have read an article saying that there are some groups of Republicans and Democrats who shape internal policies and they turn away from the European Union. But I'm sure Anne is a specialist in this respect. I would say something stronger. Without the United States, Ukraine will not be able to continue the war, I suppose. I don't know whether the whole Europe is aware of it and is aware what it means, whether we as Europe are ready for such a change. The change might not happen instantly, even if Trump wins. It may take some time, but it might happen sooner or later. That's why we should start understand why the security of Europe is so important. That's the right time to do it. Definitely so, I fully agree with you, and hence we should seek for other opportunities, financing the army, military equipment. I suppose that politicians who look into the future should be aware that the America will not always be able and willing to support Europe. How do you see that in the European Parliament? There is no people are not mentally ready for it. Sorry, both speakers speaking at the same time? I suppose that in the majority of cases not. It all depends on the election in Poland and in Germany. Recently, the German Minister of Defense or Foreign Affairs visited the United States and mentioned the need for alliance and strengthening collaboration with the USA in the defense area. But during the next election, a different government might be in the office and they will turn towards Putin. There are many hazards. That's why responsible governments and responsible European Union are so important. They need to analyze and predict such situations.
Just, I mean, the last thing on that then, I mean, in a way, is there a sense that even if Donald Trump is nowhere to be seen at the next election and a Democrat or a traditional Republican wins the election and we never hear of Donald Trump again, is there a way in which his presidency and the fact that he could say the things he did and the fact that things seem to get so close to kind of crisis situation with January the 6th and so on, that has to force everybody to think about America in a different way?
No, Donald Trump reprezentuje
Donald Trump represents something authentic.
Part of American society. Jest zawsze u nas było część izolowana.
We have always had
for you, I'll speak English, okay? He represents something real. There was always a part of American society that was isolationist. There was always a part of American society that was skeptical of foreign intervention and foreign wars, including during World War II. This expression, America First, comes from a movement of that name, from the 1930s. Because of the Cold War, because of America's role in the world in the second half of the 20th century, that movement shrunk. But it has now been reborn. It's a real part of American politics. It will be with us forever. Once again, making sure that Europeans understand that and are aware of it, including here in Poland, is very important. You know, it is actually a matter of security and safety that Poland have good relationships with Germany, with France, you know, with Italy, with Spain, with the United Kingdom. It is important that Poland be an integrated part of Europe because it could happen one day that whatever, you know, right now you have a special relationship with Washington, that's great, but it might not always be there.
Okay. You wanted to come in on that, Marta?
Chętnie.
Yes, very much so, thank you.
Nad polityką jest jeszcze czapa tego,
There is also the component above the politics, namely what we should do in order to build our autonomous readiness of response to challenges. I would like to add to the list of bad news, because this is not so simple nowadays. It would be difficult to build thinking about defense industry in the strategic sectors that have become even more important since the war in Ukraine broke out. Europe is the leader of values, which it confirmed responding to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We in the European countries, against the rest of the world, have very high standards of living due to social policy, secure jobs, or healthcare system, although it might seem quite strange to us, but compared to other places in the world, our situation is much better. There are nearly 500 million wealthy people, but we have to face the challenge of aging society, of the European economy becoming cold. 15 years ago, still with UK as the member state, we had 10% greater EU economy than the American one. Now the American economy is 20% greater than the European ones, and UK included. So we are in a kind of trap. It's not easy to build such solutions. Personally, I do believe that although politics change fast and the turning points in politics might happen out of the blue and overnight, and it depends on the result of the election, I encourage thinking how each sector or area of public, economic and social life can approach building the resilience. Resilience is the word we have been reverberating since COVID. There are plenty of events that we are not able to get ready for. Having 18 months of uncertainty during the period of election in Poland, in the EU, and finally in the US, there are plenty of spaces and fora to build our resilience. Personally, I think that the transatlantic value above it and thinking about strategic partnership between Europe and the USA, wherever it's possible, is definitely a part of the answer.
Jeszcze dodać, bo ta
I would like to add something. This resilience, it's an important word which functions also in the European Union. So I think that the European Commission, the EU, maybe not all the member states, actually have drawn some conclusions which took place during COVID pandemic when Europe was dependent on the chain of supply, semiconductors, China. During the debate, during her speech, Ursula von der Leyen was emphasizing that we are creating a strong economic union that supports European industry, which is responding to the challenges, which wants to be the leader, especially when we're talking about artificial intelligence. It's very important. In Europe, in the EU, we were the first to develop develop the right which responds the right to the threats and challenges a lot ahead. But next year we also will have European elections, so we will see what kind of force will be within the European Parliament and which directions the EU policies will follow. I would like to get back to Anne's intervention. She said that Poland should be a strong center in the European Union. We should be a strong entity. But what I can see in Poland right now, especially when I take part, when I observe the election campaign by the Law and Justice Party, they emphasize that we are Poland and European Union. It's them. It's a foreign body. EU, it's not us. So the government could actually impact everything that is going on in the European Union. But the government feels very well in this narrative. It's a dictator. It likes to offend. It's not trying to find any common values, solutions, common language. So I do hope, I would like to stress it, I hope that Poles will be aware of the history and they will make a good choice on the 15th of October. They will choose future and development.
Thank you very much. In a couple of minutes, I would like to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, you can get ready to ask it. I just want to move the focus slightly away from Poland for a moment and ask you a question, Marta. We're talking about, you're talking about values, and we're talking about these moments of turning points, all this polarization in different societies. And when you have kind of really big tech companies that are so important to the functioning of so many different societies, and I'm thinking about what we've seen, for example, with Twitter in the US, where they first of all take away Donald Trump's Twitter account, then Elon Musk restores it. We even saw this recent situation with Starlink and the war in Ukraine. And with Google and YouTube, so many people around the world, even in society, in Russia, for example, many people getting their news via YouTube. It's one of the only ways the opposition can communicate with people inside the country. So do you have a situation where big companies like yours are sort of forced to take political positions even though you don't want to? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Ja myślę, że właśnie ramy, w których my operujemy, to znaczy przede wszystkim
The framework we operate in, we are an American company, we are using hospitality of many different countries throughout the world, many countries in the EU, so we have to guarantee a kind of a transparency. So, for example, we know that AI Act is being developed. So we are also present in the countries which are not fully recognized as democratic countries, and then we are trying to propose some methods for their transparency. And for example, actually you can read some of the reports on transparency where you can find out which countries are considered to be democratic and which ones are not recognized as democratic. And for example, they ask us to remove some contents or they ask us for some details of some users. So you can read this report. This is a method used in the history of 25 years of Google operations. So, for example, we stopped operating in China, and after the attack of Russia on Ukraine, we withdrew from Russia, and consistently we do not address any request. We do not respond to the requests submitted to us from Russia. And and we operate in this Transatlantic circle, but the last 2 years have shown that we are approaching the end of the 20-year consensus of free and open internet, where the great dream was that internet should be a kind of a medium that would provide the same standard of freedom and speech and access to information to everyone. Unfortunately, it's come to the end. And in the authoritarian countries, just like in Russia, as you have mentioned, YouTube is the only platform that operates according to our rules. And anyway, we will see for how long this state will persevere. This standardization is the end of this great promise by internet. So in my opinion, we should search for some common solutions for both the EU and the United States. And we have a lot of exchanges in this field. The lady from the European Parliament said that Europe has adopted the law, and US companies are the leaders of developing artificial intelligence solutions. So it's a new romantic model to combine these two. So Europe should use technological leadership of the United States, and on the other hand, the sector of US technologies can learn a lot from Europe. Europe has shown that it can develop regulations on new technologies. Very often it's a challenge. Very often we have different values, different rules in our legal systems. So we need to harmonize, coordinate. I don't want to be too detailed, but soon, very close to us, China is investing a lot of funds in development of new technologies. So China develops instruments that violate state security, privacy. So these technologies are quite dangerous. So we need to consider how to develop based on this technological heritage. On the other hand, we need to defend our values, and we have to consider how to be competitive together towards our actors in the world, other players in the world.
That's a very interesting topic, but we will perhaps leave it there for now, because we could go into this topic for ages. Does anybody in the audience have a question that they would like to ask to one or all of the panelists? Yeah, the woman in the front row.
I would like to ask a question. Russia, we are talking about Ukraine and the future of Ukraine in the European Union, but we have to ask a question about Russia and China, because Putin's Russia sooner or later will come to its end, and probably it will be a very weak country with lots of conflicts, internal conflicts. China obviously is very happy because it's an authoritarian country, and the post-Putin order will be favored by China. China will calculate what to do to strengthen the regional influences, and how the West should get ready to these post-Putin times. Because on the one hand, we want to win with Putin, but on the other, this weak Russia would also be very dangerous to the West. I understand that this is the question about the future war between Russia and China, and how we should get ready to this. Well, it sounds quite good at the moment. It's like, gives us courage. Maybe I'm an exception, but I do not believe that there will be a civil war in Russia. I can only imagine that after Putin, maybe there could be competition between the oligarchs. Maybe it would be some instability to find out who the leader would be after Putin. What is most important, we need to understand why it's so hard to envisage, to anticipate how the situation in Russia will look like. It's not only that we do not know who will be after Putin, we also do not know how this person will be elected. So that there is no rule, there is no institution. No, there's no Politburo, there is no Communist Party, there is not even a group of people who would nominate who will be the successor. If tomorrow Putin falls out of the window or he will have a heart attack, we do not know who will succeed, but obviously this next person, his successor, will be weaker because there will be the competition. He or she will not have the authority. The vision that there will be chaos in Russia, that Russia will collapse. In internet, you can find some dramatic anticipations that the situations will be very terrible. So it's very useful to Putin. He says, well, I have to be here. If not me, after me, there will be chaos. So it helps Putin. It supports Putin.
Well, I actually wanted to, I mean, it's a question that in 13 minutes and 38 seconds, which we have left, we're unlikely to answer. But I was curious to slightly refocus the question, seeing as we're talking about Europe and European alliances. So I think in May, early June, I was at this event in the European Parliament where 4 MEPs invited all of the Russian opposition figures to come and talk and discuss what would happen after Putin. And I think this was still seen as a bit of a niche event from them, that for many people in Europe, particularly understandably in Ukraine, that have very little time for the Russian opposition. They think, they're all as bad as each other. We should focus on the collapse of Russia and not on what might come next. I know in Poland, Poland has given visas to another group of Russian former parliamentarians who are trying to draw up a constitution for this hypothetical new Russia. So my question would be, should Europe be promoting those opposition forces? Should it be thinking actively about what comes post-Putin? Or should it be more in the Ukraine mold of just we're thinking about a defeat of Russia and, its containment, and we don't really care whether it's Navalny or Strelkov or Putin?
Jeżeli mogę, ja myślę, że Putin jeszcze trochę będzie rządził.
I think that Putin will still be in power for quite a while unless somebody pushes him out of the window. We need to do everything to make sure that Putin's influences, but both the fake ones, do not weaken Europe. If we look at the UK, actually Brexit was quite a result of actions taken by Putin. If we look at many European parties, they are often funded by Kremlin. Hence, it's important that we get this strength. We need to do anything possible to make sure that all the anti-democratic parties are defeated, because strong European Union provides opportunities to counteract threats. But we have to consider whether there is a possibility that the Russian opposition will receive means and opportunities to cause some impact, some influences on Russia. I doubt it. I understood this question a bit differently, whether we should cooperate with the Russians. I think we should. But what we do, I don't agree with my colleagues from Ukraine. Ukrainians are against cooperation with Russians. Ukrainians say that all Russians are bad. But I think it's worth cooperating with them, and I think it's also important. And even if the future Russia follows democracy model used by the ancient Rome. Still, I think it's worth that there is a new leader, and hopefully, you know, Russia will be more civilized and less imperialistic. And it's worth cooperating with Russians if we want to contribute to the change of Russia. I will always go for it. And I would like to remind you that many European politicians consider that thanks to the economic development, they will civilize Putin. No, it wasn't. I didn't say it. No, I didn't say that it was you. Many leaders thought that since we have close contacts, Europe depends on the gas supply from Russia, and the war will not happen, and the war did happen. Why? Because these politicians didn't want to hear about the experience of Eastern Europe. They had this communist experience. I also believe that oligarchs will not change, but there can be the war among the oligarchs. The economic cooperation didn't change Russian politicians. I've been writing about it for the past 20 years, but it does not mean I will never say that the countries will not change. The countries change. There are changes, and Russia maybe will also change. So that's why I think it's worth considering it, although currently it looks doubtful, very doubtful. But if there are people who want to change Russia, it's worth talking with them. It's worth cooperating with them.
Very much. I think was there one more question over here? Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I would have a question regarding the safety of Europe, because there is one tendency that's making me freak out a little bit. We do know there is a lower number of recruitments, and whatever military capacity the country has, it will not fire without people. The same is for USA, I guess. The number is plummeting for last 10 years. What is the plan for the Europe? Generally, what is the plan to fight people? Because in my home country, we do have a problem. There is not an unlimited number of people. My friends thinking, should they join the army? What should we do? And the same problem will be in future. And it's safer to think now than maybe in a few years in the future. So that would be my question.
And your home country is Poland or another country?
I am a Ukrainian citizen.
Oh, Ukrainian. Okay, right. So that puts a slightly different angle on the question.
I mean, what we do now about having too few people to fight a war is hard. That hasn't happened yet. Is very difficult thing to answer. I would say two things. One is we are already, and this is happening already in Ukraine, we're beginning to understand that there will be ways to fight wars with drones, with unmanned ships, and preparing to be technologically superior to whoever might be our enemy is the way forward in the future.
100%, and I think this is exactly what I mean, that we do not only have political considerations, and that it's not always politics, but it's also about policies, and it's no secret that we're facing huge socioeconomic shortages and issues, and then taking it back to both defense and tech sector. These are probably the areas we should be looking into most. They are not present in electoral campaigns. Look at the public debate around the Poland election. Like the technological advancement is not part of it. I don't expect it to be really on the top of mind of the European campaign, but at the end of the day, this is what will define also our security and safety capabilities.
Jeżeli ja mogę,
If I may, I would like to say that the world opened its eyes because specialists thought Russia was far more technologically advanced. That's why we've got a different type of war. However, it seems that if we look into the future, let's hope there'll be no more conflicts, but if so, there'll be wars, it will be warfare using new technology, using AI perhaps, so I don't suppose the number of soldiers will determine our security. Our security will depend on the ability to use technologically advanced weapons and innovation.
I think we have time for one more question. There's one in the front here. If we could bring a microphone there.
I have a question to Mrs. Applebaum. After the last election, you said that you were afraid that this election was probably the last fairly honest election. What, in your opinion, are our chances now, and what can we do as Poles to ease this situation and help the opposition win?
That's your job.
I do this.
Yeah.
So this is already not a fair election. The ruling party is using state money to run its campaign. I probably don't have to tell people in the room how that mechanism works. They're using state media, which is the only media a part of the country has, to not just to back their campaign, but to smear and create false stories about the opposition. So we're already in the realm of not free elections, and it's already noticeably worse than it was a few years ago, I think. If that bothers you and if you care about it, all I can say is join a campaign, help a candidate. You have there's a month left to go. You can join one of these groups that will do election observation. There's plenty of information in the internet how to do that. You can make sure that people who you know are correctly registered to vote. That may be an issue this time for the first time. And you can put up banners and you can support an opposition candidate. I mean, elections are won not just by politicians. I was joking when I pointed to my colleague. Yeah, they're won by society and by people and by participation in the campaign.
Absolutnie zgadzam się z Anną.
I fully agree with The voters are most important in the election. These are not the politicians who win the election, but this is the force, the power of your votes. And the election in Poland is like David and Goliath. Their forces, measures, the broadcasts in the public television, the lies, Morawiecki's presentation. I start wondering which country we live in and why Poles accepted so a great bow towards you. No politician has won without your votes, but it's possible. I am such an example because in Podkarpacie, the civic platform was supposed not to have any chance for the European Parliament. I was 10th in the list and I succeeded. I do believe that without you, we as politicians won't succeed. Remember that your vote has great power.
Thank you very much. We just have 1 minute left, so I want to quickly, in just a few words, return to this idea of a turning point. And, we've heard a lot about how important these elections are for Poland. Domestically, we know about all of the rule of law issues, but looking again more broadly at Poland's support for Ukraine and Poland as part of this pro-Ukrainian coalition, imagining that the ruling party suffers a terrible defeat, that Donald Tusk is the prime minister, Is it also a turning point for Poland's support of Ukraine, or does everything carry on more or less as before? And you have a few seconds each.
Poland will support Ukraine. And not only that, jeżeli Tusk wygra,
If Tusk wins, Poland will be able to participate in important conversations in Europe and will become a better partner for Ukraine. I fully agree. A better partner. Donald Tusk will be a good prime minister and will become a subject of the European Union and will be there where the most important decisions are made. We used to be there, but we have went far, far away because this government doesn't like Western standards. I do hope that we'll come back with great power of our skills and value of our Polish nation.
Thank you very much to all three of you for this fantastic discussion, and thank you everybody for listening. We're out of time.
Dziękuję.
Thanks. Bye.
Dziękuję.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person, and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it, and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem, zajmowała się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Dzień dobry. To znaczy, myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co? Ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty. W urnie. Dobrze? To ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka? Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez piecu.